Mollie Hemingway joins us now, and her book is called Alito, the Justice Who Reshaped the Supreme Court and Restored the Constitution. I actually can't wait to read this because, as we were talking about it earlier, I really loved your book on Kavanaugh and Rigged. You have written some outstanding works. If I remember correctly, as I was saying earlier, you also have a fantastic mother who is a listener of this radio program. So congratulations to her on the publication of your new book. And let's dive in, Mollie, right off the top, because I know moms are very excited when their daughters and sons publish books. Let's dive right in off the top. Lots of discussion, including on this program of late, about whether Justice Alito might be stepping down. You've done more research on Justice Alito than anyone. What do you think is going to happen? How many more years do you think he has? What is not only the past, but the prologue, what is the prologue and the future look like for Justice Alito?
Well, I agree with the reporting that came out a couple days ago that he's not going to be stepping down this term. That matches my understanding as well. I thought it interesting that Thomas's chambers also reportedly, they said he's not stepping down either. I do think that people should be open to the possibility that there still will be a retirement at the end of this term. I'm not saying there will be, but I think there's a chance. There are 3 Republican-appointed justices in their 70s. They've all served, quite some time, at least 20 years, and so would not be completely shocked if there were one. But as for Alito himself, I think one of his big goals as a judge has been to protect religious liberty. Even before he got on the Supreme Court, he cared about one bad Supreme Court decision in particular, which was Employment Division v. Smith. They almost overturned it a couple years ago, but Barrett and Kavanaugh weren't quite ready to. But they're taking another bite at that apple this next term. And so I think maybe when that is done, he'll feel more comfortable about seeing his work as having reached a point where he can be satisfied. But he also could serve for another 10, 15 years for all we know.
Okay, you just dropped a little nugget there that I want to come back to. Thomas and Alito have both said there have been reports that they're not stepping down. John Roberts is also over 70. Do you think John Roberts might be interested in stepping down?
I can't, it's pure speculation, which is not
totally
ever the most healthy thing when you're talking about the court. But people always talk about Thomas and Alito, and they just leave out the guy who's been serving for the second longest time, which is Roberts. And he has had a lengthy, very full career. He's also probably mildly frustrated that some of his big goals on the court, which included collegiality and comedy and the court speaking with one voice, it seems that some of the justices, and you've seen some reports about this in the last week or so, they're just flagrantly violating those norms. And he's probably, he could be frustrated by that. And so who knows? I just think it's something worth considering if we're in the speculating business.
Hey, Mollie, it's Buck, and congrats on the book, among many great books. I'm looking on my shelf right now at other Mollie Hemingway magnum opuses, including Rigged, and, of course, Justice on Trial. And, Clay, I had to actually call Mollie during the Kavanaugh character assassination fiasco just so she could talk me off the ledge like it was going to be okay. I was like, to tell me they're not actually going to be able to do this to this guy. And it was a close one, but she kept the faith, and certainly Kavanaugh finally got through okay. Mollie, to that end, on the dirtiness sometimes within the Supreme Court, we wish it weren't so, but there is dirtiness in the Supreme Court. Tell everybody about the timing of Dobbs, which was the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. Walk us through what you found on this and what the timeline tells us about the 3 libs on the court and their lack of urgency, shall we say, to actually have that decision come forward.
So for Alito, I interviewed close to 100 people, many of them federal judges, many of them Supreme Court justices. And I got a lot of interesting stories and information out of it. But far and away, the most interesting, explosive thing I learned was that after the Dobbs leak, when the lives of each of the Dobbs justices was under threat, assassination threat, security threats, people were wearing bulletproof vests, they were being moved to secure locations, their children were being targeted. The 3 liberals who co-authored the dissent in Dobbs, which would be Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor, basically conspired to slow walk and delay their dissent to the very last minute, even though they knew their colleagues weren't just dealing with these threats, but had asked them to please hurry. And even by the time of the leak, which came months after the majority had distributed their opinion, they should have had it done by then. They didn't. They were asked to speed it up, and they declined. And to the extent that the one justice who was open to speeding things up, who was Justice Breyer, was screamed at, according to my sources, by Elena Kagan, who said, do not speed up for them. And they didn't get it done until June. And then when they filed their dissent, it still couldn't come out for another 3+ weeks because they included a completely unnecessary and gratuitous reference to a case that was still being worked on. And so the final Dobbs decision didn't come out until June 23rd, and this was nearly 2 months of people dealing with unending security and death threats. And during that time, I'll point out, Kavanaugh himself and his children and his wife, faced an assassin outside their home.
We talked about it on the program at the time. I found it to be despicable. And we've continued to bring this up every now and then when we have guests like you. Did you uncover any possible idea who the leaker was in Dobbs? Do you think inside of the Supreme Court there's any suggestion or idea of who this might be? Because we just got another leak that was super anti the so-called conservative side of the court, which suggests this isn't over, having to do with emergency dockets and whatnot. Do you think they have any decent idea who did this? What is the vibe inside of the White House, inside of the Supreme Court? You mentioned the lack of collegiality, Justice Roberts' frustration. That to me is still a huge story that it's just like everybody pretends never happened.
It was huge. And even though nobody suspected any of the justices of being directly involved in the leak, it did hamper the situation given how those justices handled the aftermath of the leak. But one of the things I really get into in the book is everything about the Dobbs leak, the Dobbs leak investigation, what went right, which was basically nothing, what went wrong, which was a ton of stuff, and just exploring, yes, it's a difficult thing to investigate, but they just did a horrible job of it. Chief Justice John Roberts, set the marshal on the task immediately, but it took weeks before they really began investigating anything. They didn't even understand all the different places that people can have copies of that draft opinion, including in their homes. They didn't ask questions of the clerks that would in any way get to the heart of the answer. So, for instance, they would say, did you leak the document? And everybody said no. Well, imagine, if you will, that one of the clerks takes the decision or the draft opinion home and someone else in the House leaks it. That clerk could say, I didn't leak it, even if there were kind of a bigger plot to get that decision to the reporters in question. They should have asked real questions like, do you know this reporter? Do you know this other reporter who were involved with the leak? Do you know any editors at Politico? Have you ever interacted with Politico? Tell us about the times that you did. They could have run it like they actually wanted to find out who did it. Now, having said all that, I do think that a lot of the people inside the court definitely have their theory about who leaked it, but until that person admits it himself or herself, it will be difficult to know for sure.
Let me ask you this, Mollie, without putting you on too much of the hot seat, although we do enjoy putting people on the hot seat somewhat here. Your new book is Alito, the justice who reshaped the Supreme Court and restored the Constitution. I am going to buy a copy today because I believe in buying books from authors who write great books. So I'm doing that. Clay's doing that. And I hope a lot of people listening will do that, too, because your previous works have proven that your books are worth reading, worth buying, and worth supporting. That all said, do you have in your mind a certainty that it was a clerk and not a Supreme Court justice involved in getting that decision released early in the way that we all saw the leak? Essentially, to you, is it 100% that it was not actually a justice and that it had to be a clerk, or do you leave open that it could have been a justice?
I have not encountered a single knowledgeable person who thinks it's any of the justices. Now, meaning particularly directly. I do think that the universe is larger than just clerks. I do think it was likely it was a clerk, but there are permanent staff members also at the court. And, some people do think that maybe one of them did. I don't, for a variety of reasons, including that the original Politico article was speaking with their source, and their source had information about how the deliberations had gone and how the decision had gone in a way that a clerk would have access to. So I think that's likely. And it's not to say that the most recent leak might not have a current or former justice at the heart of it. It very well might. But as far as the Dobbs decision itself, I don't believe they were directly involved. And I also think it's hard to have more than one person involved, frankly, for that kind of leak.
We're talking to Mollie Hemingway, great book out, Alito, that both Buck and I can't wait to read. Mollie, a lot of discussion about the upcoming decisions that are still waiting from the Supreme Court. Birthright citizenship, and expectation, I'm curious if you would share it as well, from me at least, that Alito may well be writing the racial gerrymandering case that we are waiting on. Where do you see this term going based on what your research has shown you? I know this is looking forward. And what do you think are Justice Alito's top focus points from a larger judicial philosophy, assuming that he's going to stay on the court? What do you think he's looking at and interested in addressing going forward?
So first off, on that racial gerrymandering situation case, it is widely understood that Alito is writing the majority opinion there, just because he hasn't yet written something from the October setting of the court, and so that would be the obvious thing. Now, why has it not come out yet? This relates to what I just said about what happened after the Dobbs leak. The liberal justices slow-walked their dissent to achieve political outcomes, either literally getting one of their colleagues killed or just persuading one of their colleagues to move away from their decision. That was clearly what they were doing by slow walking. Well, there was reporting last week that they're slow walking the racial gerrymandering case. And the reason why would be probably related to the fact that if Alito is writing that decision, it's going to come down in a way that affects the midterm elections, and that the liberal justices don't like that it's going to hurt the Democrat Party. And so if this is becoming a pattern, they're losing cases, they're throwing tantrums, they're yelling at their colleagues publicly, which is never, usually you just keep that to your opinions and your dissents and your concurrences, whatever mean things you want to say. But they're doing it publicly to undermine the integrity of the court. They're slow-walking decisions. This is not good. Now, as for what Alito's legacy and what he's thinking going forward, I think it's really interesting to compare. He and Justice Thomas are frequently on the same side of things. They're very consistent in their jurisprudence. Thomas is more of a libertarian originalist, and Alito is more of a conservative originalist. And I think going forward, one of the big lessons that Alito has to teach people is that you can be deeply principled and also incredibly effective. Right now, the right has these extremes where, on the one side, they're here are my principles, and I don't care what happens in terms of getting them to a point where they actually help people. And then you also have people who say, who cares about principles? We just have to win. Alito is a model, not just for attorneys and judges, but really for the entire country in how you can blend principle and pragmatism to make sure that the country benefits from those principles.
I could talk to you all day about the interior. We've got a quick turn here, but I want to ask you this. You talk to a ton of people. What's the vibe on Ketanji Brown Jackson? Is she super unpopular with everyone on the court, regardless of their politics, based on what you saw? It feels that way sometimes reading the opinions.
It's clear from reading the opinions that they don't have a lot of respect for her jurisprudence. She doesn't really try to tie things, not just to constitutional law, but the law itself. One highly placed person at the court had told me, she makes Sonia Sotomayor look like a philosopher king. So that might tell you a little bit about how she's viewed.
That's very
Yep, sounds about right. Mollie Hemingway, everybody, go get her book, Alito, the Justice Who Reshaped the Supreme Court and Restored the Constitution. Mollie, congrats on the success of it so far, and you're going to get a lot more book sales coming in today. We can assure you of that.
Thank you so much, guys.